Hey guys, here we are. We're getting ready to start Chapter 6, Matters of Sex. And we're going to be looking at Section 1, which is called Our Sexual Selves. It's going to focus on development of male versus female. We're going to talk about the sex chromosomes as well as certain traits that are linked to the sex chromosomes. So without further ado, let's get going. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is the development of sex, meaning what goes on in the embryo and the fetus to determine whether or not you go through male development or female development. Now, we can actually consider sex on many different levels. We can consider sex at the chromosomal level, which means do we consider the sex as XX or female versus XY as male? We can consider it as the at the gonadal level, which means what are the internal gonads, the internal organs that play a role in the sexual identity. So if there are testes, we typically consider it male. If there are ovaries, we consider it female. The phenotypic level, so the outer appearance, what does that look like? What would we consider that as male or female? And then there's also the gender identity level, what someone actually identifies as, what they feel they are. Now, the thing about sexual development is that up until the 9th week of development, everything kind of looks the same. What we mean by that is in the growing fetus or the embryo, what occurs is there are these unspecialized gonads that have started to form inside of the fetus. Now, at the 9th week, we're going to take those unspecialized gonads and actually develop them into a specialized gonad. And it all depends at this point on if there is a hormonal trigger to lead to that. So if there is a hormonal trigger, then we'll take the male development, which means that the unspecialized gonads will develop into the testes. And there are these Wolffian ducts that develop, and these will eventually become structures like the vas deferens, the seminal vesicles, the ejaculatory duct, etc. However, if there is no chemical signal, then it automatically takes the female development route, which means the unspecialized gonads will develop into the ovaries, and we'll have these Mullerian ducts, and these will develop into such structures as fallopian tubes and the uterus, etc. There is a misconception that we all start off as female. That's not actually true. Up until the 9th week, we all start off as neither male or female. We haven't been specialized. We haven't been actually gone through any male or female development. Remember, those unspecialized gonads can become either testes or ovaries. It's not one or the other, or it's not that they always develop into one or the other. Like, they can develop into either one. So what happens is up until 9 weeks, we are all the same as neither male nor female. It's when it hits that 9 weeks, if there is no chemical signal to steer development towards male development, then the default option is female development. And that's why there are such cases as XY females. Even though they are chromosomally male, because they have X and Y, they are on a gonadal and a phenotypic level, they are female because for whatever reason, that chemical signal never activated the development into the male structures. All right. There we go. All right, so let's keep on going. Let's talk a little bit about the sex chromosomes since I just brought them up. Human females are considered homogametic, which means that we have, remember, homo means same, and gametic refers to pretty much our sex chromosomes. So homogametic means we have the same sex chromosome. So we are XX, as opposed to males, which are heterogametic. they have an X and a Y. And the X and Y chromosomes, they do not have the same genes on them. As you can see from the picture right here, the X is a lot bigger than the Y. Interesting thing is, although in mammals it is XX for females and XY for males, in birds and snakes it's flip-flopped. First of all, we don't use them we don't name them X and Y, we name them Z and W. And in birds and snakes, the males are actually the homogametic ones, and they have two Z chromosomes, so they're ZZ, and females are the heterogametic ones, they're ZW. Now, before you get mad at what I'm about to say next, hear me out. There are no life essential genes located on the Y chromosome. What I mean by that, before anyone gets on my case and gets angry at me, is that there are no genes necessary for the survival of an individual organism on the Y chromosome, which actually makes sense because half of our population doesn't have a Y chromosome. All the females are XX. They are lacking a Y chromosome. So if there were genes that were necessary for my individual survival on the Y chromosome and I did not have a Y chromosome, I wouldn't be allowed to survive, or I shouldn't say I won't be allowed, I won't be able to survive. That is not me saying that the Y chromosome is not important. It is very important for the creation of the male sex, and having the male and female sexes are very important in a species that is sexually reproductive. So it is important. I'm just saying that there are no genes that are on the Y chromosome that are essential for the organism to survive. For the species, yes. But otherwise, half of our population would be dead because half our population lacks a Y chromosome. There are very few genes on the Y chromosome, actually. And since you can see the size difference, that actually kind of makes sense. The X chromosome contains more than 1,500 different genes. And if in a female, you can have crossing over occurring between the two X's during meiosis. But since the Y and the X are not the same, they do not have the same genes on them, crossing over cannot occur between them in males. So during meiosis in males, you cannot have crossing over between the X and the Y chromosomes. Let's see. There are these pseudo-autosomal regions on the very, very tips of the Y chromosome that have similar counterparts on the X, and that's more so to help them line up so that they can be viewed as homologous chromosomes. I'm going to put that in quotes, homologous chromosomes. They're not exactly the same, but they are partners when they line up. Remember, all of our chromosomes come in pairs, and all of the autosomes, the chromosomes that are not sex chromosomes, all of those have the same genes on them. So with the homologous pair, you have two chromosomes that have all the same genes on them. They might have different alleles for those genes, but they have the same genes. But the X and Y don't have the same genes. So it's thought that these autosomal regions on the Y chromosome, which have similar counterparts on the X chromosome, that's how they identify these two chromosomes, how our cells can identify these two chromosomes as not quite homologous, but yet homologous, and line them up during meiosis. All right. So let's talk a little bit about sex-linked traits. A sex-linked trait is very simply traits that are located on the sex chromosomes. So there are X-linked traits, meaning traits that are located on the X chromosome, and there are Y-linked traits, traits that are located on the Y chromosome. Now, a lot of times, especially when we talk about sex-linked disorders or sex-linked traits, we usually do talk more about the X-linked ones, and that's just simply because X-linked traits can affect males or females because both males and females have at least one X chromosome. Y-linked traits are extremely rare in terms of disorders. So because they are extremely rare, and they're rare enough to begin with, plus there's very few genes on the Y chromosome, and they can only affect males. That's why we generally don't talk about them too much as we are beginning to look at sex-linked traits, but they do exist. A sex-linked trait is simply any trait where the gene is located on a sex chromosome. Now with X-linked traits, if a mom is a carrier, meaning she's heterozygous, she has an allele, a normal allele on one X and an affected allele on the other, she won't show it. But she can still pass it on to her son 50% of the time because she only has two X's. One is normal, one is not. It has the recessive affected allele. So she can either pass on the normal X or the affected X, which means 50-50 shot of passing on the normal versus the affected. However, if a father has an affected X, he can never pass it on to his son because the fact that he has a son means he passed on his Y chromosome to his son. So that means he can't pass on the X. If he passes on his X, he has a daughter. And if it's an affected X, 100% of the time, he will pass that X onto his daughter. And that's just kind of what this picture is showing you. So here we have the purple means it's the affected X. So he has the affected X and the Y. If he passes on the Y, you get a son. The sons get their X's from their mothers. Only dad can pass on a Y. So therefore, if you have sons, it means they have a Y, which means it had to have come from dad. Since dad can only pass on an X chromosome in order to have daughters, and he only has one X chromosome, that's why he can only pass on the affected X chromosome to his daughters. Mom, on the other hand, she passes on an X to either child. So it's a 50-50 shot. Will she pass on a normal X to her daughters or an affected X? If she passes on the normal X and the dad is also unaffected, then you have a completely normal daughter. If she passes on the affected X, plus we get the normal X from dad, then we have a carrier daughter. Mom can either pass on, in terms of sons, 50% of the time she'll pass on the normal X, 50% of the time she'll pass on the affected X, which means she can either have a normal or an affected son. There's no such thing as carriers when it comes to males, because to be a carrier, you have to be heterozygous. You cannot be heterozygous if you only have one X chromosome. Sorry. All right, let's talk a little bit about the Y chromosome. So as you can see from this picture again, big difference in size between the X and Y chromosomes. X has a lot of genes, the Y doesn't have as many. You can see though in this picture, the pseudo-autosomal regions. And that's how they can know to line up with each other during meiosis. Now the bulk of it, this middle region, a lot of this is going to be the male-specific region, what we call the MSY. And this lies between those two autosomals, so that autosomal section at the top and the autosomal section at the bottom. That in between is called the male-specific region. And this is full of palindrome-ridden regions, which we call amplicons. Now, an example of a palindrome, think of it like words that you can read forward and backward the same. Mom, spell it forward, M-O-M. Spell it backward, M-O-M. Or the race car, R-A-C-E-C-A-R. It's spelled the same forward and backward. That's what a palindrome is. So what we have are these, when you talk about palindrome regions, they're talking about in terms of the bases. So it could be A-A-G-T-T-G-A-A. The exact same thing backwards and forward. And there'll be a bunch of these throughout this region. Now they're probably going to be a lot longer than one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or however many letters I said. Shh, Ripley, it's okay. It's okay, dude. Nope. But that's what the amplicon regions are. Now within here, we also have the SRY gene, and this is the male determining gene. This is the gene where if this gene is present and if it is expressed, this is what will trigger male development during that 9th week of fetal development. So the SRY gene is a single copy gene because, again, there's only one Y chromosome and is completely unique to the Y chromosome. There is no other Y or SRY gene on the X chromosome or on any of the autosomes, the non-sex chromosomes. There you go, Ripley. Now, the role of this, the SRY gene, is it creates the SRY protein. And this is a transcription factor, and what happens is the creation of this is what will initiate the development of the male features. So the creation of this particular transcription factor and the SRY protein, what it does is it suppresses the female development. So it suppresses the Mullerian ducts and allows for the Wolffian ducts to be developed instead. Remember, we said the Wolffian ducts are the ones that will develop into like the vas deferens and all that. It will allow for the creation and secretion of testosterone versus more estrogen. And it will be what triggers those unspecialized gonads into taking development and becoming testes versus ovaries. Again, this is just kind of that picture that we had at the bottom. It's a little fuzzier, but you can kind of see it a little bit better. The pseudo-autosomal regions. This entire part is the MSY, and right up here, that's where the SRY gene is. All right, male factors. Let's talk a little bit about these. What is it that we need to be able to do to create to allow for male development? Well, first off, here's a nice picture of the Y chromosome again. Again, you can see the, what's it called? The pseudo-autosomal regions here. This is the MSY region. There's lots of amplicons in there. But near the top, that's where the SRY gene is. Now, the factors necessary for male development. What is it that this SRY gene, and thus the SRY protein, what does it promote? What does it do? Well, the presence of these will include an anti-Mullerian hormone. So it's going to create and going to allow for the creation of this particular hormone, the anti-Mullerian hormone. And what this does is, this is what will suppress female development. So it's going to suppress those Mullerian ducts from developing, which means that there won't be the fallopian tubes and the uterus. It will suppress the unspecialized gonads from developing into ovaries. It'll also allow for the creation of testosterone, which is what we consider the male hormone, which will then trigger the development of male structures like the vas deferens, seminal vesicles, the epididymis, as well as another male hormone, DHT, dihydrotestosterone. Now again, this one will help with those male structures as well as things like the urethra, the prostate gland, the penis, as well as the scrotum. It will also nudge those unspecialized gonads to the male development so that they develop into the testes, which is where the Wolffian ducts, which will become like the epididymis will attach there, then that leads to the vas deferens and everything else. In the absence of these male factors, the embryo will follow the default female development pathway. So what that means is, if there is no hormone, so if the testosterone and the dihydrotestosterone are not created, it will take the female route. if the anti-Mullerian hormone is not created, it will take the female route. If the SRY gene is present on the Y chromosome, but it's never expressed, it will take the female route. It will take the female developmental pathway. And that leads to something called androgen insensitivity syndrome. And what this is kind of similar to some of the examples I gave, but a little bit different. In this case, in the androgen insensitivity syndrome, what occurs is testosterone is created, so the SRY gene is being expressed, the male hormones are being secreted, but there are no receptors for them. So the absence of receptors for testosterone will actually stop the male development. The hormones are there, but they can't be used. So since they cannot be used, since they cannot attach to receptors and thus stimulate the cells to go through male development, even though that individual is XY, they will develop as a female. So they will have the ovaries, uterus, fallopian tubes, etc. We give some other, what we consider abnormal conditions. Abnormal as a word has a very negative connotation. All that we mean is that there are two more or less normal developmental pathways, which simply means that if everything goes smoothly, you're either going to take this route or this route as development. These are simply less common routes of development. That's all we mean by abnormal. We don't necessarily mean it in a negative way. So there is something called pseudohermaphrodites, and this is also known as intersex, if you've ever heard that. I know that's becoming a more common term now. And what this is when someone is chromosomally one sex, but phenotypically they look like the other. So you might be XY, but appear female, or you might be XX and appear male. Now again, this is just phenotypically, so this is outward appearance. This is not on a gonadal level. So there are still testes present. The unspecialized gonads still developed into testes. Or in the case of someone who's XY, but phenotypically, so on the outside, if you saw them walking down the street, they might look female, but they have testes. That's how we know that there's something a little bit different going on with the development. And it indicates that the SRY gene is functioning. There's something else that affected development. Maybe something blocked the testosterone that at a later stage, which is why it prevented the outward male structures. Sometimes there can be what's called masculinization, and this could begin at puberty, because at that point, it's not just the testes that are secreting testosterone. The adrenal gland can also start producing testosterone. So sometimes with some of these, especially for someone who is XY chromosomally, they could experience a bit of masculinization, meaning start to develop some masculine exterior features after that, or after puberty, because now they're getting testosterone from a different source, the adrenal gland. Someone who is XX but appears male, for whatever reason, maybe something else in their genes allowed for more testosterone to be secreted earlier on in development, which is why they appear more masculine, more male looking on the outside, but they lack testes. They actually do have ovaries. We also have something called congenital adrenal hyperplasia, which is when there is an excessive amount of testosterone growing or being secreted. And this can actually cause overgrowth of the penis or clitoris. Doesn't mean that they become bigger and better. It can mean that they are more sensitive. It can mean that they don't function as well because of the distended size. All right, so sexual and gender identity. So this has been a question for quite a while in terms of gender identity and sexual identity. Are these things inherited? Well, the short answer is partially, yeah. There is no one single individual gay gene, as some people so pleasantly call it. However, it doesn't mean that there are no genes, and that's supposed to be the word B. I'm sorry, BE. What they found by doing a lot of studies is that there could be multiple genes involved in this. And there's actually strong evidence and data that supports the idea that sexual identity and gender identity both are epigenetic. So these are things that have environmental influences that can affect our genes and the expression of our genes. So in short, it does reflect many genetic and environmental factors. So it's not just one gene, there are multiple genes that could affect your sexual and gender identity, as well as environmental factors. But yeah, I mean, I won't rant about it here. I think that it's dumb that we judge people by who they love, as long as they're two consenting adults and no one gets hurt. Love is love. But anyways, I'm sorry. I'll probably rant more about that in class. YouTube probably not the right place for it. But anyways, this is what the evidence supports, that there are genetic and environmental factors that lead to our sexual identities and our gender identities. All right, so that's all of part one. I hope this was interesting for you guys. I hope that it helped you clarify some of the points of this section. If you have questions, hit me up in our Google Classroom or through email. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in class. All right, you guys, stay awesome, stay curious. Most importantly, stay safe and healthy. All right, you guys. Bye-bye.